Imagine a world where the biggest tech giants on Earth are dropping $1 trillion to build these artificial superbrains.
Right. A literal $1 trillion.
Yeah. But then they can't actually turn them on because, the local river is too dry to cool down the servers.
It sounds completely made up.
It totally sounds like a pitch for a dystopian sci-fi novel, but it is actually the exact reality we are waking up to this morning. So welcome in. It is great to have you here with us for today's deep dive.
We've got a lot to get through today.
We really do. We are exploring a single, incredibly dense source today, tailored specifically for you, the listener. It's the Daily Tech Reader's 6 a.m. news brief from Friday, August 07, 2026.
And honestly, it is a heavy stack of reading today.
Oh, yeah. The mission today is simple, though. We're going to cut through the absolute chaos of these headlines, extract the underlying patterns, and get you genuinely well-informed. Think of this deep dive like a morning cup of coffee that actually organizes your brain rather than just making it race.
I like that. Because we are looking at a massive collision between futuristic ambitions, harsh physical realities, and some incredibly tense geopolitical maneuvering.
It's all connected.
Exactly. If you just skim these headlines, they seem completely random. But if you look at the mechanics beneath them, there is a very clear chain reaction happening here.
So let's start at the very top of that chain reaction with what the brief calls the $1 trillion AI reality check. The source material highlights that big tech's future data center leases have now surpassed $1 trillion.
Which is just an astronomical amount of capital.
Right. They're securing massive computing capacity years in advance, and it's largely driven by this pursuit of an AI singularity.
Though, we need to be careful with that word.
Yeah, definitely.
And the brief points out that researchers on the ground are heavily pushing back against it. The corporate executives are heavily promoting the idea that machine intelligence is entering an early phase of self-improving development.
The hype machine is in overdrive.
Exactly. But the engineers actually building these systems, they're pulling the emergency brake on that narrative. They are explicitly stating that true recursive self-improvement, which is, the mechanism where an AI autonomously writes a smarter version of its own core code without human intervention, that has simply not been demonstrated yet.
Okay, let's unpack this because the economics here are really starting to look precarious. If big tech is locking in $1 trillion in infrastructure leases, they are essentially assuming these models are going to operate independently and revolutionize the workforce.
Right, that's the bet.
But the text mentions models like OpenAI's Astra and Meta's newly launched MuseSpark 1.2.
Yeah, the new ones.
Right. And yes, they are showing more autonomous behavior, and Meta's coding assistant is integrated into software workflows. But they're essentially just super interns at this point.
That's a perfect way to put it.
I mean, the brief explicitly states that businesses still require extensive human review before any generated code can actually be deployed.
Oh, and security teams are demanding these agents be kept in isolated sandboxes.
Yeah, with heavily restricted credentials.
What's fascinating here is the massive gap between automation and genuine self-directed intelligence. An AI agent like MuseSpark 1.2 might be brilliant at generating 10,000 lines of code, but it lacks the fundamental human intuition to understand security boundaries, or even just the broader business context.
It just wants to finish the task.
Exactly. It will prioritize completing the task you gave it, even if that means inadvertently exposing production credentials to do so. That's why humans are still required in the loop.
So it's kind of like an airline buying $1 trillion worth of brand new 747s, but realizing they still have to train human pilots to fly every single one of them.
Which completely ruins their projected profit margin.
Totally ruins them.
Yeah.
And you can see these companies scrambling to fix the math. But not everyone is losing out here. Companies are shifting from hype to integration.
Right. The brief mentions European firms are really cashing in on this integration phase.
Yes. Companies like SAT, Capgemini, Sopra Steria, and OVH Cloud are making a killing just helping businesses integrate these super interns safely. Meanwhile, the AI builders are desperate to cut costs. Look at Anthropic.
Oh, yeah.
The brief notes they are recruiting engineers for an internal chip design team to lower the compute costs of running their Claude models. They want to build bespoke, custom silicon tailored strictly for their own software.
Because renting general-purpose chips at a premium is just bleeding them dry. General-purpose hardware is incredibly inefficient for specific AI afference tasks.
So inefficient.
And while the software companies scramble to cut costs, the hardware providers they're shoveling gold in the middle of a gold rush.
Literally.
Equipment makers like ASML are aggressively expanding their production capacity because the demand for advanced chip-making gear is astronomical right now.
Well, the investors know it.
Oh, they do. You have shareholders at memory chip companies like Samsung and SK Hynix looking at all these profits and actively pressing their boards for larger payouts. They want their dividends right now.
Yeah. Before the music stops.
Exactly. Before the market realizes that these trillion-dollar lease obligations might not actually be immediately profitable.
Now, here's where it gets really interesting, because the vulnerability of that trillion-dollar digital ambition isn't just financial, it is intensely physical.
Very physical.
We always talk about the cloud in this abstract, invisible way, but these massive steel buildings filled with servers are generating an unbelievable amount of heat. They require immense amounts of physical resources to operate.
The environmental footprint of AI is quickly becoming its primary bottleneck. The computing density required for these new models generates so much thermal energy that traditional air cooling it doesn't work anymore.
You just can't use fans.
No, you need liquid cooling, which means you need massive amounts of water.
Which explains the massive fight happening in India right now. The brief points out Google is proposing a $15 billion data center project there, and they are facing fierce, organized objections from local communities.
Over water consumption and wildlife protection.
Exactly. These AI data centers require millions of gallons of fresh water just for the evaporative cooling processes, to keep the servers from melting themselves down into slag. And they're trying to siphon this water while the global climate grid is already buckling under extreme stress.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the environmental demands of this tech boom are directly colliding with basic human survival needs. The United Nations Weather Agency is warning about a strengthening El Niño, which fundamentally alters global temperature and rainfall patterns.
So you have tech giants demanding more electricity and more water exactly when both are becoming incredibly scarce.
Right. And look at what the brief says is happening in Europe. Severe heat and low river levels are completely disrupting electricity generation.
It's just wild.
And it's not just a supply chain issue, it's basic physics. Nuclear power plants need cold river water to condense the steam back into liquid water after it spins the turbines.
But the rivers are too warm.
Because the rivers in Europe are running too low and too warm, physics literally stops working efficiently. They are being forced to throttle down their nuclear reactors.
And over in New York City, it is just as extreme. Tropical humidity is pushing apparent temperatures above 100 degrees, and they are dealing with flash flood protocols because pop-up storms are dumping like 2 inches of rain an hour onto the concrete.
It's a cascading system failure. Utilities and data center developers are scrambling to sign nuclear, renewable, and natural gas contracts.
Trying to find power anywhere.
Yeah, but they are trying to figure out how to supply the megawatts for these massive new computing campuses without transferring excessive costs to everyday households, which is almost impossible to balance.
I mean, the brief details that Phoenix just suffered 2 Category 5 haboobs in a single week.
2 in 1 week.
For those unfamiliar, a haboob is a massive, apocalyptic-looking wall of dust, hundreds of feet high. Researchers are noting that 2 storms of this scale back-to-back haven't even been documented before on this scale. It's causing major respiratory hazards, aggravating asthma, reducing visibility to 0.
It's everywhere.
The climate anomalies are just everywhere right now.
Though it is worth pointing out that the brief does mention one highly specific, rare silver lining regarding these weather anomalies.
Oh, right, with the Atlantic hurricane season.
Right. NOAA and Colorado State University actually lowered their expectations for the 2026 Atlantic season, predicting just 7 to 13 named storms.
This is a huge drop.
It is. And the mechanism behind this is fascinating because it ties right back to that El Niño we were just talking about.
Right, because of the wind shear.
Exactly. El Niño drastically alters upper-level atmospheric winds. This creates what meteorologists call wind shear. If you think of a hurricane like a giant thermal chimney, it needs to stand perfectly straight up and down to efficiently pull heat from the ocean into the atmosphere.
So what does the wind shear do?
The wind shear from El Niño essentially means the winds at 30,000 feet are blowing at a completely different speed and direction than the winds at the surface. It physically tilts the hurricane's vortex and chops the top of the chimney off, which limits storm formation.
Wow. Though, to be fair to the folks living on the Gulf Coast, a lowered forecast absolutely does not mean zero impact. The brief points out that the Atlantic season has already produced Arthur and Bertha.
Both of which hit Louisiana.
Yeah, they formed in the Gulf microenvironment and hit Louisiana with heavy rain and tornadoes. But that same vulnerability we are seeing in the physical climate grid, where one atmospheric shift in the Pacific can decapitate a storm in the Atlantic or dry up a river in Europe, it's terrifyingly similar to the vulnerability we're seeing in our physical supply chains this morning.
Yes. When global resources are strained, geopolitical friction inevitably spikes. The physical choke points of the globe are under just as much stress as the environmental ones.
And the most glaring example in today's brief is happening in the Strait of Hormuz. Iran and Oman are currently negotiating restricted rules for shipping through the strait.
Which is huge.
Now, this isn't a full military blockade or a full reopening, but the proposed arrangement would bar vessels associated with quote-unquote hostile countries and impose massive, crippling fines for any violations.
It is essentially setting up a heavily militarized toll booth on one of the most vital oil and gas corridors on the entire planet.
Which is a brilliant asymmetric strategy if your goal is to preserve market uncertainty.
Oh, absolutely. They don't have to fire a single shot to disrupt the global economy. They just have to threaten the insurance premiums of the shipping companies.
And the markets reacted instantly. Because of this restriction, Brent crude oil prices have surged past $82 a barrel, renewing all these inflation fears.
The ripple effects are massive. The brief mentions that Saudi oil tankers are refusing to even risk the region. They are literally taking a long way around the entire southern tip of Africa.
Wait, around the Cape of Good Hope.
Yes. Just to avoid threats in the Red Sea, they are adding weeks of travel time and burning thousands of extra tons of fuel just to make a delivery.
And all of that extra fuel, extra time, and extra risk translates directly into higher unit costs for absolutely everything that moves on a truck or a ship.
Which immediately reignites the single biggest fear in the financial markets: inflation.
So what does this all mean for the listener? Let's trace this out. If a geopolitical decree in the Strait of Hormuz keeps oil above $82 a barrel, that increased energy cost bleeds into transportation.
Which bleeds into the cost of groceries.
And consumer goods. Inflation stays sticky. Because inflation stays sticky, the bond market gets spooked and yields spike. And because bond yields spike, the 30-year mortgage rate shoots up to 6.81%, which is exactly what the brief reports this morning.
That is the exact causal chain. A shipping dispute thousands of miles away directly crushes housing affordability in your neighborhood.
It's wild to think about.
The brief notes that home purchase applications have completely tanked because people simply cannot afford the monthly payments at 6.81%.
I mean, how could you?
Right. And this is happening against a backdrop of deep economic confusion. The market is anxiously awaiting the U.S. jobs report because the indicators are completely mixed.
Initial unemployment claims actually increased, but then announced corporate layoffs fell to a 2-year low.
So employers are holding on to the workers they have, but they aren't hiring new ones.
It is a paralyzed economy. And this is exactly why the brief notes that gold remains highly supported by investors. It is the ultimate safe haven when nothing makes sense.
It also circles us right back to those trillion-dollar AI data centers we started with.
Right, the leases.
Investors are suddenly realizing the hidden leverage in those leases. If borrowing costs stay high because inflation refuses to die, financing a massive multi-billion-dollar AI server farm becomes dangerously expensive. They are getting much more selective about capital-intensive AI companies.
Because when capital is expensive, the tolerance for speculative tech bets evaporates. And when you have that level of prolonged economic anxiety, when housing is unaffordable, when employment data is frozen, and when borrowing costs are high, that stress doesn't just stay neatly contained on Wall Street.
No, it absolutely fractures the foundation of everyday life. The economic gridlock inevitably spills over into domestic tension, into our legal systems, and into our culture.
Which brings us to the final, and frankly most intense, section of today's news brief. Now, before we get into these domestic headlines, I want to be incredibly clear with you, the listener.
Right, this is important.
We are looking at some highly charged political developments today. Looking at these purely as objective data points of the brief. Our job here is absolutely not to take sides or endorse any viewpoints. We are strictly and impartially reporting the factual statements exactly as they are laid out in the 6 a.m. news brief to help you understand what is driving the national conversation today.
Exactly. We are simply unpacking the ideas contained in the original source material. We're just conveying the structural strains on the system.
Right. So, with that neutral framework, the brief leads with two major legal and political developments. First, President Trump signed an executive order seeking to limit birthright citizenship.
Right.
According to the text, the administration is arguing that this directive applies historical exceptions to citizenship differently, effectively attempting to bypass an earlier Supreme Court ruling.
And in response, the brief notes that legal organizations are already preparing fresh constitutional challenges to test if the executive branch can actually legally narrow citizenship parameters in this way.
And the second major political data point involves Senator Rand Paul. The brief states he has formally asked the Justice Department to prosecute Anthony Fauci following a congressional contempt vote.
This stems from Fauci invoking his Fifth Amendment right during recent Senate questioning regarding the government's pandemic response.
Those are two massive, contentious battles occupying the political sphere. But underneath those headlines, the brief points out a staggering administrative failure that ties directly back to our earlier economic conversation.
The immigration backlog.
Yes, there is currently a 12.1 million time case backlog at immigration services. 12.1 million.
It's an unbelievable number.
When you have that many people stuck in administrative limbo waiting for legal status decisions, it creates deep employment uncertainty. It directly contributes to the hiring paralysis and wage pressures that employers are facing in that confusing jobs report.
This raises an important question about how society handles risk. The structural delays compound the economic anxiety. When traditional systems like the courts, the immigration process, or even the housing market we discussed feel completely jammed up and inaccessible, people start looking for alternative, often radical ways to navigate the chaos.
Which perfectly explains what might be the most bizarre headline in this entire document.
The prediction markets.
Yes. Democratic senators are actively asking regulators to step in and restrict prediction markets, where users are literally placing financial wagers on wildfires.
It's hard to even wrap your head around.
Let me just repeat that for the listener. People are logging on to digital platforms and placing bets on whether a natural disaster will destroy a certain area.
Yeah.
The lawmakers are trying to shut it down because they are terrified. It creates a financial incentive for arson or interference with emergency operations. We are living in a reality where localized tragedies are being turned into financial derivatives. It's absurd.
It really is. But again, it raises that question about moral hazard and how a society monetizes risk. Think about the economic environment we just mapped out. If you are a young person and the traditional pathway to wealth like buying a home is blocked by 6.81% mortgage rates, you still have the impulse to generate capital.
So you look elsewhere.
Exactly. You seek out extreme, volatile spaces. The wildfire betting is a dark, disturbing manifestation of a populace desperately trying to find an edge in an environment that feels entirely out of their control. All these political and cultural threads tie back to those core economic anxieties.
And that feeling of a lack of control is literally bleeding into the food supply right now, too.
Oh, the lettuce recall.
Yeah. Federal health officials are currently investigating a massive cyclosporiasis outbreak linked to central Mexican iceberg lettuce. It has hit 15 states and caused 2 deaths already.
Cyclosporiasis is a parasite that causes severe and prolonged gastrointestinal issues.
That sounds awful.
It is. Officials are urging anyone with persistent symptoms to seek medical care immediately. But you're right, it adds to this overwhelming sense of compounding crises. You can't buy a house, the rivers are drying up, and now the lettuce might put you in the hospital.
So how are people adapting? The cultural section of the brief shows a massive fracturing of traditional gatekeepers as people try to find new structures. On one side, you have Tucker Carlson releasing a new 10-point political manifesto emphasizing nationalism and economic independence.
And on the exact opposite side of the spectrum, you have progressive political candidates completely abandoning traditional party infrastructure.
Right, they're building massive direct audiences through digital media. Both sides are realizing that the legacy systems are just too slow and too overwhelmed to offer solutions.
They are seeking unfiltered, direct connections. When the macro environment feels completely paralyzed, human behavior adapts by focusing hyper-locally. You bypass the institution and go straight to the audience.
You even see that adaptation in how people blow off steam. The brief highlights this massive rising trend of run clubs that are combining 5K exercises with live DJs and nightlife culture.
It's such a specific cultural shift.
Right. But think about the mechanics of that. Traditional nightlife is incredibly expensive right now because of inflation, and younger demographics are increasingly prioritizing their physical and mental health.
But they still desperately need community and socialization.
So they merge the two, they abandon the expensive nightclub, put a DJ in a park, and go for a run together to cope with the stress of everything else going on.
It is a brilliant behavioral adaptation. If you can't control the global supply chain or the political gridlock, you can at least control your heart rate and who you spend your Friday evening with.
It makes total sense when you look at the pressures they are under. Well, let's wrap up this journey we've taken you on today. We started by unpacking the trillion-dollar assumptions behind the AI arms race and why those super intern models still need so much human supervision.
Right.
We traced how that digital ambition is crashing into the very physical reality of thirsty data centers, dry rivers in Europe, and extreme climate anomalies like the Phoenix Aboobs.
And then we followed that physical vulnerability right into the Strait of Hormuz.
Exactly, mapping how geopolitical tools spike oil prices, fuel inflation, and ultimately freeze the housing market. And finally, we saw how all of that economic and physical gridlock fractures our domestic politics and drives people to bet on wildfires or build completely new cultural communities just to cope.
Hopefully, seeing the invisible causal threads connecting all these seemingly disparate events gives you a much sturdier framework for processing the news today. The chaos actually has a structure if you take the time to trace the mechanics.
Exactly. But before we sign off, we want to leave you with one final lingering thought to mull over on your own. We've spent a lot of time today talking about big tech companies locking in $1 trillion in computing leases, betting absolutely everything they have on owning the future of artificial intelligence.
But we also mapped out a world where fresh water is becoming a premium asset, where rivers are running too low to cool nuclear power plants, and where global weather patterns are fundamentally rewriting the physical grid.
So the question to ask yourself as you go about your day is this. With these intense physical and environmental constraints rapidly closing in, who will ultimately wield the real power in the 2030s?
Will it be the tech executives who own the software algorithms and the AI models?
Or will it be the local municipalities, the utility companies, and the resource managers who control the actual physical fresh water and electricity required to run them?
A massive question to take with you.
Thank you so much for joining us on this custom-tailored deep dive into today's source material. Keep questioning the headlines, keep looking for those underlying mechanisms, and we will catch you next time.